When I first saw the pictures, I thought my heart had stopped. There she was, my daughter, my little girl, standing in a white gown under a flower arch, holding hands with a man I had never met. Her face was glowing, her eyes filled with tears of joy. Everyone around her was smiling, clapping, celebrating. And me? I was sitting alone in my kitchen, with a cup of cold coffee in my hand, staring at the screen like someone had punched the air out of my chest. No one had told me, not a call, not a message, not even a whisper. My daughter, my only child, got married, and I found out because someone posted her wedding photos on Facebook. At first I thought it was a mistake, maybe a photo shoot, maybe an engagement party, maybe something small I wasn't supposed to know about yet. But as I scrolled through the pictures, her in the gown, the vows, the kiss, the reception, reality hit me like a truck. It was real. She was married, and I wasn't invited. My hands were shaking. I remember whispering to myself, "Why, baby? Why would you do this to me?" The phone slipped from my hands. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed in the silence of my house. The same house I bought when she was born, the one I worked 3 jobs to pay off. Every brick, every corner, every nail had her laughter in it. Every scratch on the wall told a story of her growing up, her first steps, her tantrums, her teenage years, the nights we cried together after her father left. She was my whole world, and now it felt like she had erased me from hers. I spent that night scrolling through her pictures, looking for clues. Who was this man? When did she meet him? Who were those people smiling beside her? Where was the girl who used to say, "Mom, you're my best friend"? The comments were full of congratulations. "You two look perfect. Such a beautiful couple. So happy for you both." Not one person mentioned me. Not one person asked where her mother was. I sat there until sunrise, numb. I kept staring at her smile, that same smile I had seen every morning before school. The same smile that used to make me believe I was doing something right. And now it was shining somewhere I no longer belonged. The days that followed were a blur. People called me after they saw the pictures. "Did you know she was getting married? Oh my God, were you there?" I didn't have answers. I just said no, and they'd go quiet, because what do you say to a mother whose daughter left her out of the happiest day of her life? A week later she called. I'll never forget her voice. It was hesitant, fragile, like she already knew I'd seen the photo. "Mom," she said softly, "I was going to tell you." I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it came out bitter, broken. "You were going to tell me what, Emily? That you got married? That you wore the dress I helped you pick when you were 10? That you promised I'd be there to walk you down the aisle?" "Mom, please," she whispered. "It's complicated." "No," I snapped. "It's simple. You didn't want me there." There was silence. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "I knew you'd never accept him." "Accept him?" I repeated, stunned. "You didn't even give me a chance to meet him." She started crying. "Mom, I didn't want drama. I just wanted to be happy." "And you think you can be happy without your mother?" I said, voice trembling. "Do you think I'm the kind of woman who would ruin her daughter's wedding out of spite?" But deep down, I knew she did think that. Because that's what her father used to say, that I was controlling, that I couldn't let go, that I always wanted things my way. Maybe she believed him. I don't even remember how that call ended. I just know that when it did, something in me broke for good. For days, I walked around the house like a ghost. Her room was still the same, her childhood drawings still taped on the closet, the bedspread I bought when she went to college, still neatly folded. And then one morning, I made a decision. If she wanted to start a new life without me, I would help her. I called a realtor. Within a week, I put the house on the market. The house that held every piece of her, every memory of us, every moment I thought meant something. When it sold, I took the money, packed my things, and left. I didn't tell her. I didn't leave a note. I didn't even look back. Because sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go, even when it tears you apart. But the truth is, you never really let go. You just learn to live with the silence that follows. The first few months after I sold the house felt like walking through fog. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. I rented a small apartment in another town, small enough that it didn't echo with memories. No photos on the walls, no familiar furniture, just white walls, one chair, one bed, one woman trying to forget the sound of her daughter's laughter. People told me time heals everything. They lied. Time doesn't heal, it only teaches you how to hide your pain better. Some nights, I'd find myself scrolling through social media again, even though I promised I would. I'd see her, my daughter, smiling, with her new husband, at parties, at dinners, traveling. She looked so happy, so free, and I would just sit there, staring at the screen, whispering to myself, she's okay, that's what matters. But deep down, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like punishment. I had spent years working my fingers raw to give her a better life. I skipped meals so she could eat. I sold my jewelry to pay for her college. I never once asked for anything in return, just her love, her time, her voice at the end of the day saying, I love you, Mom. But love, it seems, has an expiration date. When silence grows between people. One rainy night, about a year later, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I saw her, Emily. She looked smaller somehow, thinner, her hair was tied back, her eyes red, her expression trembling between guilt and relief. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stared at each other, two strangers with the same face, the same pain. Mom, she whispered. I didn't move. I didn't know if I wanted to hug her, or close the door. Why are you here? I asked, my voice steady but cold. She bit her lip, eyes filling with tears. Because he left me. I blinked. What? Her words came out in a rush, broken, desperate. He cheated on me, Mom. He said he loved me, but I caught him with someone else, and I didn't know where else to go. There it was, the irony, the circle of life's cruel justice. I looked at her, my daughter, the one who thought I was too strict, too controlling, too dramatic, and for the first time in years, I didn't see her as a child. I saw her as a woman who finally knew my pain. She sobbed as she fell into my arms. And despite everything, the betrayal, the silence, the heartbreak, I held her. Because that's what mothers do. We hold our children, even when they've broken our hearts. We forgive them, even when they've erased us from their lives. We love them, even when love has been turned into a wound that never heals. She cried until she couldn't anymore. I made her tea, the way I used to when she was little. We sat in silence for a while before she whispered, I'm so sorry, Mom. You didn't deserve that. Any of it. I stared into my cup, the steam fogging my glasses. No, Emily, I didn't. But neither did you. She reached for my hand, and for a moment it felt like time folded, like the years of distance, anger and silence had never existed. But forgiveness isn't a light switch. It's a slow process. Why didn't you tell me? I finally asked, my voice trembling. Why didn't you want me there at your wedding? She looked down, ashamed. Because I thought you'd see him for who he really was, and I wasn't ready to admit you were right. I let out a long, shaky breath. All those sleepless nights, all that pain, it wasn't hatred that kept her away. It was fear, pride, the same things that tear families apart every day. I stood up and went to the window. Rain was still falling outside, gentle and rhythmic. You lost your house, your husband, and your peace, I said quietly. Now you understand what it means to lose everything you built with love. She nodded, tears glistening. I do, Mom. I really do. We stood there for a long time, neither of us speaking, just breathing, just existing in the same space again. That night, she slept in my bed. I stayed awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. I thought about all the years wasted on silence, all the words we never said, and for the first time in a long time, I cried, not from anger, not from pain, but from relief, because no matter what had happened, she had come back. Sometimes love returns, broken, humbled, and late, but it returned. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the room, the kind of gentle light that softens everything it touches. For a moment, as I watched Emily sleeping beside me, I forgot the years we'd lost. She looked peaceful, her face almost like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after a nightmare. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, and my throat tightened. She stirred and opened her eyes, smiling weakly. Morning, Mom, she whispered. It had been so long since I'd heard her say that word, Mom, just 3 letters, but it felt like 1,000 apologies in one. I nodded softly. Morning. We ate breakfast together, quietly, both of us unsure what to say. She told me bits and pieces of what happened, how the man she thought was her forever had turned cold, distant, cruel, how he made her feel small, dependent, and unworthy, and how when she found out about the affair, he told her it was her fault for not being enough. I listened without interrupting, just letting her speak. When she finally stopped, I reached across the table and said, "You were always enough, Emily. You just gave your heart to someone who didn't deserve it." Her eyes filled again. "I wish I'd listened to you, Mom." I saw. We all learn when it's too late. That's life's way of teaching us what love really means. After breakfast, she went to take a shower, and I sat alone staring out the window. My heart was heavy, but also strangely calm. For years I'd carried anger like armor, but now it didn't feel worth it anymore. Watching her suffer had shown me something I hadn't wanted to face, that no revenge, no silence, no distance could ever fill the emptiness of losing your child's presence. When she came out, wrapped in one of my old towels, she looked at me and smiled faintly. "I can't believe you still have these towels. They're the same ones we used to take to the beach." I laughed softly. "Some things never change." She sat beside me and hesitated before speaking. "Mom, I know I can't make things right overnight. I don't want to lose you again." My chest ached. I looked at her trembling hands, her tired eyes, and said, "You already lost me once, Emily. Don't do it again." "I won't," she whispered. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, we found our rhythm again. We cooked together, talked late into the night, even laughed a little, but the shadow of what happened still lingered, like a bruise that hadn't fully healed. One evening, she showed me the message from her ex-husband. He had found out where she was and wanted to meet, to talk things over. She was shaking as she read it out loud. "What should I do, Mom?" I took her phone gently and set it down. "You go and face him, not to get him back, but to show him he no longer controls you." She looked scared. "I don't think I can." I reached for her hand. "You can. You're my daughter, and you're stronger than you think." The next day I went with her. She wanted me there for support, so we met him at a cafe, the same man who had stolen my daughter's trust. He was charming, handsome, the kind of man who smiles with his mouth, but never with his eyes. When he saw me, his face shifted slightly, surprise mixed with discomfort. "Mrs. Harris," he said, forcing a polite tone. I just looked at him. "You buried her spirit, and now you expect her to dig herself out just to forgive you." He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. "You took her away from her family. You taught her to doubt herself. But here's what you didn't destroy: her strength. Because she's mine, and I raised her to rise even from ashes." Emily's hand tightened around mine. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from power. Her ex sat back, speechless. The silence between us said everything. Emily finally looked him in the eye and said, "I forgive you, not for you, but for me, because I'm done carrying the weight of your mistakes." We walked out together, the afternoon sun washing over us, and for the first time in years, I felt light, like something inside both of us had been set free. When we got home, Emily hugged me tighter than she ever had before. "Thank you, Mom, for everything, for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." I smiled through tears. "That's what mothers do, darling. We don't stop loving. We just wait until our children find their way home." That night, as I watched her asleep again, I whispered a prayer, not for revenge, not for regret, but for peace. Because sometimes, love's greatest act isn't holding on, it's forgiving, even after the heart has been shattered. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I finally had my daughter back. Continue. "You said, yes," ChatGPT said. Months passed. The seasons began to change. Leaves turned gold. The air grew softer, and our lives quietly settled into something that almost felt like peace. Emily found a job at a small art studio downtown, the kind that smelled of paint, dust and dream. I'd watch her leave, every morning with that spark back in her eyes, and every evening she'd come home, humming softly, while cooking dinner, like the weight of the past was finally lifting. One evening, as we were washing dishes together, she said, "Mom, Do you ever regret selling the house? I froze for a moment, the question cutting through me like a whisper from the past. The house, her childhood home, the place where I'd raised her, loved her, and later the place I'd sold in anger. I took a deep breath. No, I said slowly, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to let go of something that reminded me of pain. It was never the house I missed, Emily, it was you. Her eyes softened. I know, I hurt you so much. You did, I admitted quietly, but we both did things out of pain. We just showed it differently. That night, she told me she'd been seeing a therapist, that she wanted to heal properly this time, not just survive. I felt proud in a way I hadn't in years. She wasn't the same scared, confused girl anymore. She was growing into a woman who understood the cost of love and the value of forgiveness. A few weeks later, she came home with an envelope in her hands. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to show you something." Inside were documents, house paper. My breath caught. I bought it back," she said softly. "Our old house. I wanted to surprise you. I used the savings from the divorce settlement, and my new job. It's ours again, Mom." For a long time I couldn't speak. My hands shook as I touched the paper. "You bought our home back," she nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I wanted to fix what I broke. I wanted to give you back what I took." I covered my mouth, the emotion hitting me like a wave. I had cried many times in my life, out of anger, grief, exhaustion, but this was different. These were tears of healing. "Oh, Emily," I whispered, "you didn't have to." "I did," she interrupted softly, "because I need to rebuild, not just with you, but with myself." The day we went back to that house, I'll never forget. The front gate creaked the same way it used to. The garden was wild, overgrown, but beautiful. The air smelled like memories, sweet and painful. As we stepped inside, the walls seemed to breathe again. There were ghosts in every corner, echoes of laughter, fragments of arguments, the faint scent of cookies we used to bake together. Emily walked around slowly, her fingers brushing over the furniture we once owned. "It's smaller than I remember," she said, smiling faintly. I chuckled. "You just got bigger." We spent the whole day cleaning, painting, restoring what time had worn down. By evening, we sat together on the old porch swing, watching the sun set the way we used to, when she was little. "Mom," she said softly, "do you think we can start over?" I looked at her, my daughter, my lost and found child, and I smiled. "No, sweetheart, we can't start over, but we can start again." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "That's enough for me." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized something. Love isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. It's about surviving storms, forgiving what's broken, and holding on, even when the world tells you to let go. That night, as we locked the door of our old new home, I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Not for the house, not for the past, but for the second chance I never thought I'd get. Because sometimes, the people who hurt you the most are the same ones who will teach you what real love is. Not the kind that's flawless, but the kind that comes back, mended and strong. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't lost my daughter. I had finally found her. Winter came early that year. Snow covered the garden in a quiet white blanket, and the house, our house, looked like something out of a dream. Emily had put up a small Christmas tree in the living room, decorating it with ornaments we'd kept in an old box for years. Some were broken, some faded, but she handled each one like it was a piece of her heart. As we decorated, she laughed softly and said, "Do you remember when I dropped that glass angel and you cried more than I did?" I smiled, shaking my head. "It wasn't about the angel, it was about what it meant. It was the last thing your father gave us before he passed." She stopped, looking at me, her expression suddenly tender. "You held everything together, didn't you, Mom? Even when everything was falling apart." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. That night we sat by the fireplace, the crackling flames painting our faces in gold and orange. Emily rested her head on my lap, just like when she was little. "Mom," she whispered, "sometimes I wonder if Dad would be proud of me." I brushed my fingers through her hair and said quietly, "He'd be proud that you came back, that you found your way home." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Do you think he'd forgive me?" I looked at the fire for a long moment before answering. Forgiveness isn't something we have to earn. It's something we give ourselves so we can breathe again. I think he'd want you to breathe. The room fell silent, except for the soft pop of the firewood. Outside, snowflakes drifted gently past the window, catching the light. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from understanding. The next morning, I woke up early and found Emily in the kitchen, making pancakes, her father's favorite recipe. She smiled when she saw me. I thought maybe we could make this a tradition again. I laughed softly. I'd like that. Later that day, as we sat eating breakfast, she handed me a small wrapped box. For you, she said, her voice trembling a little. I opened it slowly. Inside was a glass angel, new but identical to the one we'd lost years ago. I wanted to replace what was broken, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Not because it matters, but because it means something. I stared at it, the tears coming before I could stop them. Oh, Emily, she smiled through her own tears. I don't deserve you, Mom. I reached for her hand. You're wrong. You deserve every bit of love this world has to give. You just had to lose yourself to learn how to find it again. We sat there, holding hands, surrounded by the quiet hum of morning, the smell of coffee, the sound of wind outside, the weight of peace settling gently over years of pain. As the fire burned low that evening, I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it transforms it. It turns pain into wisdom, anger into understanding, and silence into healing. That night, before bed, Emily hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for waiting for me, Mom." And I whispered back, "Thank you for coming home." Because sometimes, love doesn't die. It just waits in the corners of old houses, in the smell of pancakes on a winter morning, in the hands that still reach for each other after all the hurt has passed. It waits until we're ready to find it again. Spring arrived softly that year, like a long-forgotten promise finally kept. The snow melted into gentle streams, the garden began to breathe again, and the house filled with the scent of blooming roses, the same kind I used to plant when Emily was a child. It felt as if life itself was whispering, "It's time to begin again." One morning, Emily called me out to the yard. She was kneeling in the soil, dirt on her hands and cheeks, smiling like sunshine. "Mom," she said, "I'm replanting the roses you loved. Remember how you used to say they were stubborn like me?" I laughed softly, stepping close. "They always grew back, no matter how harsh the winter was. Guess that's something we have in common." She looked up at me with that warm, knowing smile that used to light up my world. "I think we're both learning how to bloom again." Days turned into weeks, and the house became a place of laughter once more. We cooked together, painted the old walls, filled them with photos of new memories. One evening, she came home with something unexpected, a stray dog. "He was shivering outside the studio," she said, holding the small brown creature close. "I couldn't just leave him." I raised an eyebrow but smiled. "Looks like our family just grew by one." We named him Lucky. And in a strange way, his arrival seemed to complete the quiet circle of healing that had begun the night she knocked on my door months ago. One Saturday, Emily stood in the doorway watching me sip my tea. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. If you could go back, if you could change that day, the day you found out I was married, would you do it?" I thought for a long moment, the cup warm in my hands. "No," I said softly. "As much as it broke me, it taught us both what love really means. We lost each other so we could find each other again. Sometimes, pain is the only road that leads home." Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. "You always know what to say." I chuckled. Years of practice, and a few heartbreaks. The next day, Emily told me she'd been offered a teaching position at a nearby art school. It was her dream job, something she'd always wanted but never thought she could do. I hugged her tightly. "Take it, sweetheart. Go live your life. You've earned it." "But what about you?" she asked. "I'll be fine," I said, smiling. My heart's full again. That's all I ever wanted. When she finally moved into her new apartment, it wasn't far, just a short drive away. We promised to see each other every weekend, and every Sunday morning, she'd show up with Lucky in the passenger seat, coffee in hand, a smile on her face. Life had changed. We had changed. But what remained was something stronger, a bond built not just on love, but on survival, forgiveness, and understanding. One Sunday evening, as she was leaving, she turned at the door and said, "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled and said, "That's what love is, Emily. It doesn't give up, it just waits until it's found again." And as I watched her drive away, the golden sunset painting the world in light, I realized that our story wasn't about loss anymore. It was about return. About how love, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back home. Because in the end, home isn't a house, it's a heartbeat, the one that keeps beating for you, even when you've forgotten how to listen. Years passed like pages turning in a quiet book. The house that once echoed with loneliness, now hummed with life again. Not the frantic noise of the past, but a calm, steady rhythm of peace. I had grown older, my hair had turned silver, my hands lined with stories, but my heart was soft again. Every weekend, Emily would visit, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends from her art school, and always with Lucky, who had now grown lazy and spoiled from all the love he received. She'd bring her paintings, her laughter, and her light, filling the house with the kind of warmth I thought I'd never feel again. One spring afternoon, she showed up with something different. A canvas, larger than any she'd brought before. She covered it with a cloth and said, "Mom, I've been working on this for months. It's us." My heart fluttered. "Us?" She nodded, her eyes glistening. "But not just us now, it's our whole story." She lifted the cloth and I gasped. The painting was breathtaking, vivid, emotional, alive. It showed two women, one younger, one older, standing hand in hand under a rose tree. Behind them, in shadowed colors, were scenes from our past: a woman crying alone by a window, a daughter walking away in a wedding dress, a house standing empty under stormy sky. But toward the center, everything grew brighter, sunlight breaking through clouds, roses blooming again. The two figures reunited. I couldn't speak, my eyes filled with tears. "Emily," I whispered, "it's beautiful." She smiled softly, brushing a tear from my cheek. "It's our story, Mom. All the pain, the silence, the forgiveness, it's everything we've been through. I'm going to exhibit it at my school next month, but I wanted you to see it first." I reached out, touching the painted hands of the two figures. "It's perfect," I said, my voice breaking. "You turned our pain into art." She squeezed my hand. "You taught me how to." That night, we sat on the porch swing again, just like we used to when she was little. The stars were scattered across the sky, and the scent of blooming roses wrapped around us like a soft memory. "Mom," she said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot lately about the future." I looked at her, smiling. "And?" She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "There's someone new in my life. His name's Daniel. He's kind, gentle. He knows about everything." I studied her face, the mixture of hope and fear that only someone who's been hurt truly understands. "Does he make you feel safe?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe again." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "Then that's enough, my darling. That's all love needs to be. A place where you can finally breathe." Weeks later, she brought Daniel over for dinner. He was soft-spoken, respectful, the kind of man who looked at her as if she were a piece of art he could never quite believe was real. I saw the way he held her hand, the way his eyes softened when she laughed. And for the first time, I felt no fear, only peace. After dinner, as Emily and Daniel laughed together in the living room, I found myself standing by the window, watching them. The laughter that once left my home now lived here again, fuller and freer than before. Tears filled my eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. Because somehow, after all the storms, life had led us both back to the same truth, that love, when it's real, always returns. It might take years, it might take breaking and mending and learning how to start again, but it returns. And as I looked out at the garden, at the roses swaying gently in the breeze, I whispered to myself, we made it. Because sometimes, forgiveness doesn't just heal the past, it builds a future stronger than the pain that tried to destroy it. Years continued to pass, each one quieter, softer, not empty, but content. Emily and Daniel eventually married, but this time it was different. She didn't run away. There were no secrets, no pain hidden behind smile. Instead, she came to me one afternoon, her voice trembling with emotion, and said, "Mom, I want you to walk me down the aisle." I froze for a moment, trying to hold back the tears. "Me?" I asked. She nodded, her eyes already glistening. "You were both my mother and my father. You've carried me through every storm. No one deserves that place more than you." I didn't even try to stop the tears then. I pulled her into my arms and whispered, "I'd be on." The wedding was held in the garden of our old house, the same garden where she once played as a child, where I once wept after losing her, and where we had finally found each other again. Roses surrounded us, blooming as if the earth itself was celebrating our healing. As the music began, I walked her down the aisle, my arm linked with hers. The guests stood, the air warm and golden, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman carrying grief. I felt like a mother witnessing grace. When we reached Daniel, he looked at her with tears in his eyes, and said, "You've already found your home. I just want to build it with you." I smiled, knowing in my heart that this time, she was safe. During the reception, people laughed, danced, toasted. But at one point, Emily came up to me, holding her glass of champagne. She gently tapped it with a spoon, quieting the crowd. "Before we celebrate," she said, her voice trembling, "there's one person I need to thank." Everyone turned toward me. "My mother," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "The strongest woman I know. I made mistakes. I broke her heart. But she never stopped believing in me. She taught me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about coming back. It's about choosing to forgive, even when it hurt." Tears blurred my vision as she continued, "Mom, this home, this peace, this love, none of it would exist if you hadn't shown me what true strength looks like." The guests applauded softly, and I felt something inside me finally settle. The ache that had lived in my chest for a decade lifted like a curtain being drawn back to let the light in. That night, after the guests left and the candles burned low, Emily came to sit beside me under the old oak tree. "Mom," she said softly, "do you remember the day I left for my first wedding?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I remember every second." She took my hand and placed it over her heart. "This time, I didn't walk away. I walked toward love. And I could only do that because you showed me how to forgive." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle into my soul. "You came back to me," I whispered. She smiled through tears. "And I'll never leave again." We sat there for a long while, watching the last of the lanterns fade into the night sky. The garden smelled of roses and rain, the same scent that had once carried my sorrow, now carrying peace. As the stars shimmered above, I realized that love, real love, doesn't vanish. It changes shape, it hides in time, in silence, in pain, but it always finds its way home. And sometimes, home isn't a place, it's a moment like this, sitting beside the person you once lost, knowing that no matter how broken the journey, love found its way back. Because even after all the years, all the tears, and all the storms, I learned the greatest truth of all: you can lose everything, but if you still have love, real forgiving, unbreakable love, you have enough to start again. The years rolled forward gently, like waves brushing against the shore, each one softer than the last. Emily and Daniel built a life that was calm, grounded, and full of quiet joy. They didn't chase wealth or perfection, they built something rarer. Every Sunday, they'd come to visit me, sometimes, with Lucky, now old, slow, and spoiled, sometimes, just the two of them. We'd sit under the rose tree, the same one that had seen every season of our lives. The same branches that had once shaded our tears, now held laughter instead. One warm afternoon, Emily arrived with a strange brightness in her eyes. "Mom," she said, her hands trembling, as she held out a small envelope, "I have something to tell you." I took it, my heart skipping. Inside was a sonogram. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked up at her, her eyes shining, her smile trembling, and it hit me. Emily, I whispered, tears already forming. You're pregnant, she nodded, and before I could speak again, she threw her arms around me. You're going to be a grandmother, Mom. I held her tightly, laughter and tears, mixing in one long breathless moment. The circle of life had turned again, from loss to love, from silence to laughter, from death to birth. Over the next few months, our world revolved around that little miracle growing inside her. I went with her to doctor's appointments, helped her set up the nursery, cooked her favorite meals, all the things I once did when she was small. Only this time, the roles had shifted. She was the mother now. One evening, while we were folding baby clothes, she looked up at me and said softly, Mom, I've been thinking about names. Oh? I smiled. And what did you come up with? She hesitated for a moment, then said, if it's a girl, I want to name her Grace. My chest tightened. Grace? She nodded, her voice trembling. Because that's what you gave me, Mom, when I didn't deserve it. I had no words. I reached across the table, took her hand and whispered, you're my Grace too, Emily. Months later, on a quiet autumn morning, Grace came into the world, tiny, fragile and perfect. When I held her for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the raw, aching purity of love, the kind that has no conditions, no expectation, just warmth, heartbeat to heartbeat. As I looked down at that little face, I whispered, welcome home, my darling. You have no idea how many tears it took for you to arrive here. Emily smiled, from her hospital bed, exhausted but glowing. She's the proof, Mom. Proof of what? I asked softly. That broken hearts can still make miracles. And in that moment, everything, every year of pain, every sleepless night, every silence, made sense. The wounds had become wisdom, the grief had become grace. When we brought Grace home, the house seemed to glow. Emily stood in the doorway, rocking her gently, and said, she'll grow up here, Mom. The same place I did, the same walls, the same love. Tears filled my eyes. Only this time, I whispered, it'll be different. She nodded. This time, no secrets, no silence, just love. As the sun poured through the window, lighting up the three of us, mother, daughter, granddaughter, I felt the quiet beauty of redemption settle over everything. We had walked through fire and come out whole, and as I watched little Grace yawn in her mother's arms, I realized the truth that life had been trying to teach me all along. Love never dies. It transforms. It passes down. It heals what time alone cannot. And sometimes, the most beautiful endings are really just new beginnings written in forgiveness, because that's what this story was always about. Not loss, not revenge, not regret, but return. Love left. Love broke. Love came back. And this time, it stayed. Years later, when Grace turned 10, the house was filled with the same laughter that once echoed. When Emily was her age, she had her mother's eyes, and her father's kindness, but there was something deeper in her too, something that reminded me of the quiet strength, born from pain and healing. Maybe it was the way she'd hold my hand without saying a word, when she sensed I was lost in old memories, or maybe it was how she'd ask the kinds of questions only a child unafraid of truth could ask. One night, as the rain tapped softly against the windows, Grace crawled into my lap with her favorite blanket, and asked, Grandma, did Mommy ever make you sad? The question froze me for a second. Emily was in the kitchen, humming softly, as she baked cookies, and the smell of sugar and butter filled the air. I looked down at Grace's innocent face, the same face that had unknowingly mended so many cracks in my heart, and I smiled. Yes, sweetheart, I said gently. A long time ago, Mommy made me very sad. Grace frowned. Did you stop loving her? I shook my head slowly, my throat tightening. No, my love, I never stopped, even when it hurt, even when I was angry. Love isn't something that disappears because of pain. Real love, it waits, it forgives, it learns to start again. She tilted her head, as if trying to understand something bigger than her world could yet hold. So that's why you smile at her like that? I smiled softly. Yes, because every time I look at her, I don't just see who she is now, I see who she became. After all the storms she walked through. Grace thought for a moment, then whispered, I hope I grow up like Mommy, and like you. My heart swelled. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, and said, You already are, my little Grace. Just then, Emily walked in, holding a tray of warm cookies, and laughed. Are you two having another one of your secret heart-to-hearts? Grace giggled. Mommy, Grandma said she never stopped loving you even when you made her sad. Emily froze for a heartbeat, then looked at me. Our eyes met, and in that look, everything we never said was understood. The regret, the forgiveness, the gratitude. She set the tray down and came to sit beside me, taking both of our hands in hers. Mom, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm still sorry. I shook my head, smiling through tears. You don't have to be. You came back. That's all that ever mattered. Grace looked between us, confused but happy. Can I say something? She asked. We both nodded. She grinned. Then no one in this family is allowed to leave ever again. Emily laughed, pulling her close. Deal, she said. As they hugged, I sat back and watched. The two generations I'd prayed for, loved for, fought for, and something deep inside me finally settled completely. That night, after they went to bed, I stood by the window watching the rain fade into a calm mist. The garden glistened under the porch light, the roses heavy with drops of silver. I thought of all the nights I had cried in that same spot, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. And now in the quiet peace of this moment, I realized I had. Life had taken so much from me once, but it had also given me back more than I ever expected. Not the same love, not the same innocence, but something stronger, purer, love that had survived loss, love that had learned to forgive, love that had come back home. And as I turned off the lights and walked toward my room, I whispered one last silent prayer, not for protection, not for healing this time, but for gratitude. Because in the end, the greatest gift life ever gives isn't perfection, it's a second chance. The years slipped quietly into the folds of memory, and I found myself growing older not with bitterness, but with peace. The house was never silent anymore. It echoed with laughter, with footsteps, with stories being retold by little voices. Grace grew up to be the kind of young woman who carried light wherever she went. She had her mother's fire, and her grandmother's calm, and she somehow carried the best of both our worlds inside her. Emily often told her, "You come from women who learned love the hard way," and Grace would roll her eyes and say, "Yeah, but you both make it look beautiful." Sometimes, when the evenings grew golden and the sky blushed with the colors of dusk, we'd all sit on the porch together, 3 generations, each carrying pieces of the same story. Emily would rest her head on my shoulder, and Grace would sit on the steps with her sketchbook, drawing the roses that had seen it all. One evening, as the breeze danced through the garden, Emily turned to me and said softly, "Mom, do you ever think about the past anymore?" I smiled. Sometimes, but not the way I used to. Back then it was pain. Now, it's just part of the journey. I look back and see everything that had to break for us to become who we are. She nodded slowly. I used to hate myself for what I did, but now, when I look at you, I just see forgiveness. And I realize, that's what saved me. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. We saved each other, sweetheart. You taught me that even broken love can find its way home. Grace looked up from her drawing and smiled. You guys are so dramatic, she said, and we both laughed, until our sides hurt. It was in that laughter, pure, unguarded, real, that I felt life come full circle. Every tear I had shed, every lonely night, every heartbreak that once felt like the end, had led to a home filled with warmth, a daughter who had found her way, a granddaughter who would carry our story forward, not as one of loss, but of strength. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in soft amber light, I leaned back and let the peace of the moment wash over me. I knew time was moving, and my years were nearing their twilight, but there was no fear in me, only gratitude, because life, with all its cruelty and mercy, had given me something priceless, a chance to forgive, to be forgiven, and to love again. When the stars began to appear, Grace looked up and whispered, "Grandma, when people die, do they really go away?" I smiled gently. "No, sweetheart. They stay, in stories, in hearts, in laughter. As long as someone remembers, they never really leave." She leaned her head on my lap, and Emily wrapped a blanket around us both. The night hummed softly, the roses swayed, and for the first time in a lifetime of storms, I felt nothing but stillness.
because I had learned that endings aren't about love, they're about legacy, about the love we leave behind, the forgiveness we pass on, and the peace we finally earn. And as I looked at the two of them, my life's greatest gifts, I whispered silently to the night, I'm home.